Stephen Scharf, welcome to What's Possible.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And for our listeners, Stephen is the Chief Information Security Officer at a $25 billion company. As I do with all of the people who come on our show, these thoughts are Stephen's and Stephen's alone. He is not here representing his company. So with that said, I'm going to let you know what we're talking about today, and then I'm handing it on over to Stephen. So Stephen could share a little bit more about himself beyond the information security world. So today we are talking about leadership success through failures and through mistakes. And I am so excited about this topic because I don't feel like senior leaders talk about that enough. And so we have a lot of listeners who might be looking at getting to the C-suite, and we're often trying not to fail, not to have mistakes. And the reality is, it's hard to show up as a human and not stumble and fall quite often. And when we can look at those mistakes and those fumbles and see, how do I actually create success in my life as well as through whatever this mistake was, that is the gift and that's the gold. So I'm excited for our topic. And before we get to that, Stephen, why don't you share a little bit about what we may not find on LinkedIn about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of an open book. I can't think of anything that would be on LinkedIn corporate-wise. There's a lot of personal stuff that I guess the nice thing about LinkedIn is it doesn't actually cover those areas. although some people tend to, I think, overshare on LinkedIn when it comes to personal opinions and beliefs. But I'm a fairly average, somewhat boring individual who's gone through multiple experiences in the corporate world. Enjoyed, appreciated all of them, including the one I'm at now. But I think that. So I been in this field, within the information security field now, for 25 years, which is shocking because I know I look much younger than I really am. And, I reflect back on when I started, especially in leadership, and I cringe, like when I role play in my head things that I did and how I acted and behaviors that I undertook, because I didn't know any different. I was just young and ignorant and kind of clueless as to how to do some things, which I think maybe when it comes to lessons for failure, probably have more earlier in the career. Maybe it's been less as time has gone on, which seems to be the way it should progress. But yeah, it's just. Yeah, it's you don't want to Monday morning quarterback yourself, but you do role play in your head. 20 years ago when you were in this situation and this was what you did, or this is the behaviors or the things that you commented on, and you're like, oh, that's I can't believe I did that now in the hindsight of having more experience.
Well, and hopefully when we do that, it also allows us to be a little more empathetic to the younger people on our teams when they have stumbles, because again, it's so hard to get to your level and not have had those trips along the way.
What I tend to tell people, especially my own team that sometimes have to listen to me, is if you haven't had any failures, then you haven't tried hard enough, right? There's probably a lot more success you could have had that you didn't have because you didn't push the envelope further and then realized that it was too far or that was not successful. Then you recognize the failure, then you pivot and you moved on. But when people come to me and say, I've had an amazing career, I haven't failed in anything and everything's a success, I'm like, well, then you probably only realized half your potential, right? You probably could have done a lot more if you had pushed the envelope a little bit further.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And when I think about that too before we dive into this piece, I'm going to throw this out there, is there also needs to be some kind of safety, psychological safety to push yourself within organizations, or maybe it's a failure that then has you leaving an organization, pivoting, and then starting something different. So, but before we go on that path, because you are in a unique field, and I know you didn't specifically study this, how did you land where you are today? Just give us a snapshot of the journey.
It was definitely not a kind of a linear approach, and to your point, I never thought about being in information security. When I started, it didn't even exist in the context that it does now. I followed something that I enjoyed, and I'm just very grateful that it's a profession that has taken off as much as it has and is successful. But when I first started, when I was in school, the two things that I had was I thought I was a bit analytical. I thought I was a bit outspoken, and I liked to tinker with technology. And so I was going to double down on the first two and go to law school. And I got my degree in history because history and political science are really the two main undergrads that go on to law school. And so as I was advancing in university, I had the benefit of a friend of my parents who was a judge in New Jersey, and he invited me to come behind chambers for a few days and watch all the proceedings and just everything from oral arguments to discussions behind to, I got a full immersion in what the legal profession would be like, especially if I was in courtroom-based law. And I came out of that realizing this is not what I wanted to do. And which kind of gets to my first lesson of fail. If you're going to fail fast whenever possible. You don't want prolonged failures. You want quick failures if you can. So I came out of that saying I don't want to go to law school, but I enjoy history and I don't want to change my major. The only other thing that was logical was teaching, but I didn't have the passion for teaching. So now I'm graduating with really no idea of what I'm going to do. And this is kind of pre-internet, so 1994. And I thought, okay, well, let's look at the third thing, which is I kind of like technology. I feel like I'm a bit outspoken. Maybe I'll go into sales, selling software or selling technology or something. So I went to the library in the town that I was living in, and I got a book that listed every company that was incorporated within my county and the surrounding counties. And I wrote down all the contact details from every single company that sounded like it was a technology firm. And then I sent out 1,000 resumes, cover letters, and just blitzkrieged, right, the entire area. I got like 3 or 4 calls. I got 2 interviews. So the first interview was, I didn't know what the word textile meant, but I thought it meant some kind of technology because it started with tech. And so I go for the interview, and then I realized textile means laundry. So I show up for the interview at a laundromat, and then they're walking me through like what the job is. And I was like, yeah, this is so not what I thought textile meant. And then I went to the other one and thankfully got the job because you only need one job, even if you send out, a lot of resumes. And that was with a small family-owned company that was selling computer software. And because they were so small, like 30 people, I started in sales. But in order to be successful, you couldn't just sell it. You had to install it. You had to support it. You had to, work with upgrades. There was a lot of back-end stuff that I wouldn't have had to do if I was in a large company just doing sales. So I got exposure to a lot of different things. Yeah. And that really started me down a path of, well, the selling is fun, but the technology is more fun. So I kind of walked away from sales, went into tech and did a bunch of tech related positions, systems administration, network engineering, things that normal tech people do. And then I started to get more and more exposure to the security side of technology. And this was the late 90s, early 2000. And I kept, getting more and more fascinated by those projects that I got put on. And then I just had an epiphany and I said, well, why am I coming to work every day doing a bunch of tech stuff, which is okay, and doing some security stuff that's really fun? Why don't I just go get a job where I can do that all the time and just do the security part as the full-time gig? And so that started me down this path. And that was in like 1999, 2000, when that happened. And I've been on that journey ever since, going through different levels of roles and then ultimately into executive level positions for 26 years within this industry. But I didn't know anyone would care about. We didn't even call it cyber. Like, we're really good at branding and cool marketing techniques. It was just called information security back then, or data security, or computer security. Now it's called cybersecurity because that sounds edgy and kind of cool. Yeah. And but it's the same thing. It's the same job. It's just, the threat environments, everything keeps changing, but the core competencies kind of still persist over that 26-year span.
Wow. I absolutely love this story. I also love this story for this time of year as we start to have a lot of college graduates heading out into the world. And it can be so daunting thinking about what job, what do I want to be when I
Yeah.
grow up kind of thing. And so what I love hearing in this is you you figured out, where do I start? All you needed was that one job. And again, we always joke about, when I was job hunting, I was looking through yellow pages, trying to
Yeah.
find, companies to reach out to. And it's, in some ways it's easier,
Yeah.
because you do have search engines, and in other ways, of course, it's harder. However, you didn't land in securities right away. And so
Mhm.
for you to be finding that first step and then thinking, okay, what do I like about this? How do I want to move over here? And it's a great lesson for if we
Yeah.
have kids or other people graduating.
Well, and when I talk to younger individuals who either join our firm or I come across in other contexts, um, I I always tell people you have two choices. You can follow your passion or you can follow the money. And if you follow the passion, if you're good at it and you really are bored into it and you bring the energy and the excitement, the money will come, right? You just have faith and not always, but there's a good chance that will happen. If you follow the money, like, yes, you might end up a little bit more wealthy than you would have if you did the passion route, but there's a greater chance you're not going to like what you do. You're not going to enjoy it. Like, there's all sorts of negative that comes with that. So I always just tell people, especially when you're starting out and you're allowed to make a lot of mistakes versus when you have more obligations as you get later in life in your career,
Yeah.
follow the passion, don't follow the money.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking, how do I want to weave in well-being into this? Because, of course, our podcast, we talk about leadership and well-being. And I try to make sure that we're addressing well-being too, because it's such a critical point in being a strong leader. And when you follow that passion, your well-being also goes up. And when you're
Exactly.
purely following the money, and if you hate what you're doing, you're waking up every day dreading it, what's happening inside in your body is
Yep.
typically not healthy. And so
Yep.
having that sense of meaning, purpose, and just excitement for what you have ahead of you.
Well, and when I've had the benefit of hiring many people throughout my career, and people ask me, like, what do you look for in a candidate? Like, what do you prioritize when you talk to people? And I pretty much say the same thing: is I prioritize energy and intellect. Because I can teach everything else. Like, if you
Yeah.
come to me with no skills, I can teach you all the skills in the world and I can make sure that you'll be successful in the things that we need. But I can't teach you to be smart and I can't teach you to be excited. And so when you come to me and you're intelligent and you're energetic, and the energy, I always say energy is infectious in both directions, both positive and negative. You bring in someone who brings a lot of positive energy, they uplift the entire team. You bring in someone
Yeah.
with negative energy, they push down the entire team. So, having someone that has that enthusiasm, that really wants to be there and can bring in a bit of a different mindset or a different approach and is smart about how they approach things, that to me, like, you hit a home run with that if you then
Yeah.
empower them with all the trade craft and the specific skills that they need to be successful.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It's that is contagious. And so the last thing you want to do is have somebody in there who's sucking the air out of the room, because no one
Yep.
could do good work when that happens. All right, let's go in. Are you ready to be vulnerable and share a mistake or a failure?
Of course.
Let's do it.
Um,
So, yeah, give us some stories.
Okay, so the first one that I would offer is something that I refer to as having managerial courage, and this is more applicable as you get later in your career. But I've had times earlier in my career where I didn't have enough confidence or felt too afraid to just make a decision, and either you're looking around for someone else to make the decision for you, or you're trying to build consensus ad nauseum, and you just don't have the confidence to do something, knowing that what you pick might be wrong, but you kind of make the best decision you can with the data you have at the time that you make it, and then you go from there. Now, I will offer a carve out, which is some organizations maybe are not as forgiving or as supportive, and so, like, you make one mistake, you're fired. Like, that's a more difficult
Exactly.
environment to be in. Hopefully, if you're in an environment that does allow for a reasonable amount of mistakes and failures, that's a different scenario. So, I was at a firm much earlier in my career, and I was also responsible for physical security at the time. So I was not just information security, but physical security. And there was an event that was being scheduled at our corporate headquarters. And the event team came to me and they said, listen, it's a private event. And so even though it's in like the main area of the corporate headquarters, we need to shut down all these entrances and we need to stop flow. We need to reroute staff. We can't have people kind of walking through the event at the time, even though they basically picked one of the main lobbies within the building to do it. And so at the time, I was, very early in my career, and even though I was executive leadership, I kind of got there through, some ways, which was a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill. So I was in my early 30s, and I thought my job was to do what I was told. So you're telling me that you need this done, and so I did that. So I gave the directions to people and made sure that no one could walk through that common space because that's what the event team wanted. I didn't think through all the permutations of it because the guard team that I used took it literally, like you'd expect that they would, and so they were blocking like senior leadership from accessing critical areas and people who had to get places that were time sensitive. They had to they were late because they'd have to take long. It was a nightmare. And so afterwards, I got a complete dressing down from my boss, and he was like, what were you thinking? Why did you do that? And I said, but that's what they asked me to do. And he's like, okay, you just do whatever anybody asks you to do. That's not what we pay you for, right? Your job is to have opinion. So I said, okay. So I reflected on that. Thankfully, I didn't get fired. And then fast forward like a year later, and I'll share the company where I was working with Bloomberg at the time, and so Bloomberg has their news headquarters in their main building in Midtown, and this was UN week, and so all the world leaders are in town, and so everybody's trying to get the interviews of the most senior people, and Bloomberg News had scored an interview with just recently the president of Afghanistan. And so he was going to come to the studio and get interviewed. And because of what the times were at the time, there was a lot of police protection that was assigned to his movements. And so there was an advanced detail that came and met with me and said, okay, in order to do this safely, we need to shut down these elevators, and we need snipers, and we need dogs, and we need this, and we need these are all the things that are necessary to make this happen safely. And I looked at it and I said, okay, well, this is going to be a massive impact for a lot of our staff in the middle of a day, in the middle of our largest building. And I said, no, we're not going to do it. And they're like, well, if you don't agree to these security controls, then he can't come because we can't secure the site. And I said, well, then he can't come. And so they were going to lose the interview, which was like the interview of the year that they were so so happy to get. And I just said, listen, I'm not going to allow that to happen. Now, that was a risk for me to take because I could have gone the other way where my boss would have said, what were you thinking? Like, we lost one of the biggest interviews that we were going to have for the year. But I took a stand based on what I had learned from the previous experience. In the end, it was fine. They were able to do the interview somewhere else, and that worked out okay. But there was no one to escalate to because all the other leadership was out of band. So I was,
right?
I was the one making the decision, and I wasn't going to make the same mistake that I did with the events team from the year previously. And so I just made the call. And, what I tell people sometimes is, if you make catastrophic mistakes, obviously those are hard to recover from. But sometimes not making a decision is a lot worse than if you just made the wrong decision. And so having that kind of inability to just, especially in a leadership role in corporate, in a corporate setting, you got to have the courage to do something. Hopefully you get it right. Hopefully you get it right most of the time. And hopefully the company you work at has a culture that's accepting of a reasonable amount of mistakes. But I've seen so many people just have paralysis where they just don't want to be the one that's blamed for the decision going the wrong way. And then you just live in a fear state and you can't, it doesn't give you the confidence to be able to do these things.
Yeah. Well, and that's a high stakes one for you to be making that decision and potentially losing something significant. It's
Yep.
so timely that we're having this. I actually was meeting with a client just the other day who was she worked for an organization, left to work for another organization. Now there's a position back where she was, a different position. And 2 years later, she's applying for a position there. And she was saying, one thing that's tough is I know I relied more on my manager to help with decision making. And she said, now I've had this other opportunity. I make decisions, I execute,
Yep.
and again, I take responsibility if I'm wrong. She said, I want to make sure that they see me in this kind of new stage of my career and the new stage of leadership. So we had a whole
Yep.
conversation just a couple days ago on this exact topic and needing to be able to execute, have a point of view, and stand
Yep.
by that point of view. Yeah.
Well, and it's fascinating, and this is talked about quite often. When you get to executive level positions, people really underestimate how much they're being watched. And they think that if somebody sits there stares at you for like 20 minutes straight, then obviously this person's watching me. But the truth is that so many people in so many different places of the firm at different levels are watching you, and they're watching everyone else, and they're looking how you behave, how you act, what you're afraid of, what you're confident with, what you're indecisive about. And all of that sends like a ton of signals throughout like your group and the larger group and the firm, et cetera. And people sometimes are just ignorant to the fact that the things that they act and the things that they do potentially have these unintended consequences that cascade down.
Yeah.
So, working in information security, I've had circumstances that have come up within my career where you have to do instant response. Like a bad thing has happened, and now you have to respond to that bad thing. And what I've learned throughout that journey is that if folks don't have a certain amount of confidence in what you're doing, if they don't see you as being authoritative and being in control of the situation, then people will swarm on you, right? And if folks don't feel like someone's in charge, then they, especially in a type A environment, everybody feels like they have to run forward and be in charge. And it just creates exponential chaos. Whereas if you just have someone who's accountable and is driving it and people feel comfortable in that process, then it's a lot more orderly and you're actually able to deal with things. But also early in my career, I didn't really appreciate that when I was dealing with some high stress, high crisis things, it wasn't just what I was doing, but it was how I was doing it and how I was perceived, and then either the support or lack of support that you get as a result. Now, that doesn't mean be an asshole, right? I mean, you could be confident and assertive, but in a constructive way where you're still empathetic and engaging. But if you use a lot of discounting words, maybe, think so, could be, if you don't talk like in definitive statements, it's all bad news.
Yeah. I feel like you were listening into my conversation with this client because we were talking about exactly that. She was saying something, I think I'm going to say, I believe this, or I think that. I said, no, this is it. We need to start getting rid of, and particularly I have to say for women, oftentimes we can qualify with, I think this, or I believe this. And sometimes that is appropriate to use, but oftentimes to be able to show up more definitively, like you said, and ready to execute.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, the stakes are high. So you're dealing with security and big time security issues. So how do you kind of get yourself in that frame of mind to be able to execute? Maybe I was going to say execute without that fear voice coming in. And maybe the fear voice is always there and you execute, feel the fear and do it anyway.
So I think not really fear, but I mean, there's definitely the imposter syndrome that creeps in, which is sometimes negative, sometimes positive. Sometimes it drives you to be more successful, over prepare, and do things because you're always afraid that maybe someone's going to say you're just not good enough for this role. So I think that definitely helps to drive things. On the fear side, well, when I first started out in my career, and I don't know if we're oversharing, but I guess that's the whole point of a podcast. So I was
share away.
So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was much younger, like when I was 10, 11 years old. And then for folks who don't know, Crohn's disease is really a digestive issue, which was not as common back then, but is now quite common, and lots of people suffer from Crohn's disease. Now, Crohn's has things that flare up and cause incremental problems, or sometimes it can calm down and have less problems. And there's certain triggers that cause flare-ups. Some of them are digestive or things that you eat, but one of the big triggers is stress. And so people who have Crohn's, if you have tremendous stress, you're more likely to get abdominal flare-ups as a result. And so I was programmed at an earlier age that when I was stressed, I was in pain. And when I wasn't stressed, I was not in pain. So having this kind of trigger of stress means physical pain actually was quite helpful as I advanced my career, because it really forced you to compartmentalize and be able to operate in a way where you could manage your stress so that you didn't have physical pain as a result. I didn't know that it would be beneficial later in my corporate life, but I'll take it. So what that means is I'm very focused and I'm very engaged on things that require attention, but I'm also conscious of the fact that I can only control the things that I can control. And there are things that are going to happen that are outside of my control. I do the best I can to prepare for them, and I do the best I can to react to them when they happen. But to sit there and concern myself with the 75 possibilities that may or may not materialize, you'll overwhelm yourself just with that piece. So I try to stay in the now. I try to stay managing what I can manage. And if something happens that's unexpected, then you'll pivot and you'll manage something else. But you can't just consume yourself with all of the possible permutations, because then you just get paralyzed.
Yeah. No, I love that. We have a client who, it's a client organization. And so when we're coaching several leaders in the same organization, the coaches will meet together to do best practices, etc. And there's one common theme that always comes up with this client. And one of the coaches on our team constantly says, we have to help the leaders focus in on where do you have control and then what's out of your control. Because we spend so much time worrying about what's out of our control when in fact it's out of our control, so it's wasted worry. And so if you can focus in on what can I make a difference in, what needs my attention right now, and then make a decision around that. Absolutely. So why don't we do this as we wrap up? I know
wrap up. I got like 12 more stories.
Okay. You know what? Okay, let's go for one more story. I'm putting you on the spot. Give us your favorite last story. Okay.
So I sometimes can communicate through sarcasm or through other mechanisms, which
really?
Anyways, sometimes resonate, sometimes don't. So I learned a lesson early on that sarcasm does not necessarily translate well across geographies, especially across languages. So I have on my mobile phone, a lot of times people have a little signature block at the end of their mobile phone because autocorrect can sometimes be frustrating. And so they'll have a disclaimer that says, autocorrect is responsible for my mistakes or something like that. So I had a signature on the bottom of my phone for mobile messages that said, like, this message was sent fast and furious from mobile device. Please excuse any grammatical errors. And that was just auto attached to everything. And so I was managing a team that was in Brazil. And the leader of that team, who reported to me, she was very standoffish in how we engaged. Like, I could just tell that there was something that was wrong, but she wouldn't say what it was, and but every time we had something where we would have to interact, it always felt uncomfortable. And so I finally said, look, I'm gonna call this out, because I just, I'm just not sure what's happening. So I said, listen, what is there a problem here? Like, do you have a concern or something that's frustrating you? And she said, well, every time I get a message from you, you say that you're angry with me. And I said, what do you mean? I said, I'm angry with you. And she said, well, the message says it was sent furious. And I'm like, this went on for months, right? Like, this was months. That she thought I was angry with her, like every time I would send her a mobile message. And so, thankfully we solved it, but it just made me realize that some things that you don't even think about as creating barriers, create a
Yeah.
barrier. And so, culturally different, language different, like all these things that could creep into an engagement that
Yeah.
you haven't even thought through. And thankfully I had enough interaction with her that I was able to sense it and then call it out. But if it was someone I only engaged with twice or three times, I probably never would have corrected it. They just for the rest of their life would have thought that,
But you were
I was
furious.
an ass and I was furious with them. It made me realize that, as much as we have our own communication style, it's
Yeah.
not on everyone else to change to adapt to your communication style. It's on you to change your style to adapt to other people. So when I engage with folks at senior leadership levels, at mid levels, at junior levels, I always find it incumbent on me to change my approach,
To
change my
calibrate.
dialogue, change my story.
Yeah.
How am I going to best connect with this group? And if it's a group of interns versus a board committee, there's very different communication styles,
Yeah.
very different
Yeah.
storytelling. But I can't go to that group and say, well, you need to hear me differently, or you need to adjust your listening so that
Right.
you connect with what I'm telling. It's on me. So, you
Yeah.
know, I find as executives, like one of the things that we are is we're storytellers, right? How do you convey messages? How do you get across the facts that you want people to understand, or take actions that you're trying to generate? And a lot of that is how compelling your message is, and
Yeah.
that message delivery really varies greatly across different audiences, and what might resonate with them.
Yeah, I love that you said that. Particularly, you are at the top of your space. And for you to still be able to say, it's my responsibility to shift how I interact with people, it's really beautiful and it's so critical. One thing that we do, which our listeners have heard me talk about in various podcasts, we do offer a 360 through our company. However, the 360 that we do is transparent. And the reason it's transparent is it's essential that if somebody has feedback about you that, Stephen, it feels like he's too aggressive when he talks, or he's, whatever, too direct, it feels scary. I'd rather, be able to have a conversation that feels a little calmer, whatever. Maybe I say that about you, and then somebody else says, I love Stephen's direct way of speaking. It
Yep.
lets me know exactly where he stands, etc. So you get different perspectives
Yep.
from different people and how you interact. And when you have a confidential 360, all of a sudden you get this feedback that one person loves how direct you are, but there's other people who don't. Now you're direct with everybody because you don't know who's the one who loves it, who doesn't love it.
Yep.
And so it gives you an opportunity to calibrate based on who you're
Yep.
interacting with. And I love hearing you say you do that naturally.
Well, and it's funny that you raise that, because I try to do it. I know I realize that I'm not always great at it, and then I can always do better. So I did have an experience, which is probably about 10 years ago, where I had a direct report, and he had come to me and he had presented to me what he was going to present as a project that was, kind of finishing off. And so I looked at it and I said, okay, well, like if I was you, I would change this, I would change this, I would change this, and then you're good to go. And so he goes off, he does the presentation, doesn't change anything. And it didn't go as well as it could have in those areas. And so I sat with him afterwards and I said, I'm confused. Like, we met, we talked about this, and I told you things to change. And he's like, no, he said, you said if I was you, then I would change these things, but I'm not you. So I kept them the way that they were. And then I realized, like, wow, like, okay, I need to be more literal. I can't just, kind of assume that people hear what I think I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so then we changed our engagement style. And then when I continued to engage with him for the time I was at that firm, I was very direct. Like, you need to do this, this, and this. And then it worked out much better. But I assumed that some of my language would have been interpreted and action, but that wasn't the case. So it was, you still find yourself in those, learning experiences.
Yeah. Well, and because as humans, we're all so different. And so what we need is, again, it's going to be different. And every time you're interacting with someone new, it's figuring out what's the style here? What's going to work
Yep.
for the two of us? Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure everybody has the mixture. Well, I won't say everybody. Everyone in leadership has a mixture of direct reports and staff, where some people, they want to get right to business, right? If you have a meeting, jump right into the details, jump right to the topics. Like, they don't want to spend time with the chit chat. Some people, really do appreciate the opportunity to talk non-work related and engage on a few topics before it segues in. And you got to know which are which, right? Especially if you're meeting with people more senior than you on, what is the style that's going to best work.
Yeah. You can guess my style. I like a little idle chit chat before.
Of course. Yeah.
to warm the room. So, okay, I'm not going to cut you off again. Look at your notes. See, is there any story that you haven't shared that you would love to share with us?
If it was a 4-hour podcast, I probably had a few more, but no, I think I'm good at this point.
Well, I've picked up a ton of different topics. We are going to have you come back because there's different things that you've brought up that I'm like, I want you coming back. And now I am going to do our traditional ending. However, before that, I will let our audience know that Stephen Scharf is my first cousin, and it is so fun. First off, I've never asked you the question of how you ended up in securities. Maybe I have over dinner one time. I don't think so. So that was a new story for me. Mm-hmm. And it's so exciting for me to see just your leadership development over the years, the success that you've created for yourself, and the self-awareness in terms of I still hear from you. I'm still growing. I'm still learning, and I want to make sure that I'm showing up in the best way possible. And so I have such admiration for you and your career. So thank you for that. But you're not off yet. Okay. And that is why, listeners, that's why Stephen will come back, because he has to. When you're family, you just do these things. So, all right. What do you hope our listeners leave with as their big takeaway?
Well, I guess I would bring it back to the title of this session, which is have confidence to try things and have failures. Now, if you have the same failures repeatedly, that's bad. If you have big failures, that's bad. But if you have not those two categories and you just try things, and standard disclaimer, if you work in an environment that's tolerant of having a certain amount of failures, that's the only way you're really going to grow your career. And back to what I said earlier, like it's nails on a chalkboard for me when I talk to someone and they can't share anything of a mistake that they made or a failure that they had, because either they're lying or they're telling the truth, but they just have not actually advanced their career probably as far as they could have, or other things in their life. If they had taken some courage to try some things, fail, learn, adjust, and be more successful from that. So I think it's just, have the courage to take some chances, realizing they're not all going to work out, and then pivot from that and just, grow from the experience.
Move it forward. So I'm guessing if you ask somebody about their failures in an interview or something, their weakness, you don't want them saying, I'm just too organized.
Well, my favorite, my favorite is, I care too much. Like I am so committed that sometimes I can get, fixated, and I do need to step back but I just care too much.
That's, what that is going to be the podcast we're going to do is interview question or interview answers that really rub you wrong. That we are doing podcasts on that. Okay. So now, what is your one mindset shift that you hope people leave with?
I guess I would probably go to the communication part, which is, especially when you're more senior within a firm, people don't realize that the messages you convey and how you convey them are just as important as the messages themselves. And so reflect upon, okay, if I'm going into this meeting or if I'm having this individual interaction or I have the presentation that I have to do, the facts are great. And how you're going to, assemble the facts are really important, but think about the audience. Think about what will resonate best with them. Think about what you want the outcomes to be. Are you going in there to try to build, try to get a decision made? Are you trying to inform people? Are you trying to get everyone to agree on a certain approach? Like what is the desired outcome that you're striving for? And then what will resonate best with that group? And then really reflect on your presentation and your storytelling in order to enable that. The facts will support it, but I've seen a lot of failures where people have taken material and they completely miss the mark, and the conversation goes, off the rails in a direction because they just didn't they didn't pay enough attention to who they were talking to.
Yeah, know your audience and then communicate to them and with them.
Yep.
Yeah. Excellent. And then what is one super easy thing someone can do? They end the podcast. Of course, this is after they follow the show, they comment and all of that good stuff. And now they're done. What is one thing that they can do to kind of embrace this idea?
That's easy. Go make some mistakes.
Love that. Boom. And then very final is what's possible when people do make mistakes?
Is that a question or a statement?
It's a question.
Yeah, I think that what's possible when you make mistakes is not just learning from that mistake, but understanding how far you might be able to go in a direction with a specific skill set, project initiative, or whatnot. But I look at kind of draw a circle around whatever it is that I'm working on, and if everything's successful, you're kind of contained within that circle. And it's only when you make a failure, it's kind of you've crossed one of those circle boundaries. Now you know where the boundary is, right? If you haven't pushed all the way to the failure, then you don't know how much room was left between you and the outermost part of the circle. But the failures really allow you to understand what's the total breadth of the area that you can influence or that you can do something about, versus just staying, tightly within what could have been a much bigger expanse.
Love it. Stephen Scharf, thank you for joining me on What's Possible.
Thank you for having me.